All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for being here with me today. I'm your host, Nolan. We got a lot to get into today on this Friday. So, Jimmy Kimmel, I'm sure you've all heard, was pulled off the air by ABC after comments he made regarding the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And I have mixed feelings on this. We're going to get into all that and the thoughts from both sides and kind of where I stand on the matter. Also, I do want to talk about the left's hypocrisy when it comes to free speech, because I think it's glaring. And while I think that on the surface, some of the things that some figures on the left are saying are correct, and I disagree with some things that the administration is saying they're going to do about free speech when it comes to Charlie Kirk, the hypocrisy is just too much to handle. And I'm going to talk about the fact that people like Obama preaching free speech is about the most hypocritical, ridiculous thing you could possibly do. So we'll get into all this and more today on the Quest for Clarity podcast.
Americanism, not globalism.
I am not a slave. I am a free citizen.
There should be no Federal Reserve System.
Only America first.
End all of these wars.
America is trying to play empire. We want everything released, and you're actively covering it up. It's not America first to be pushing our influence in areas where it shouldn't be. We're run by people that don't understand what they're doing and don't understand the ramifications of the policies they're enacting. That's an incredibly dangerous situation.
All right, everybody, before we begin, if you wouldn't mind going down below this video and hitting like and subscribe, I would really appreciate it. It helps me out a lot. We're almost at 100 subscribers, so if you guys could please click subscribe, I would really appreciate it to help us meet that goal. Also, if you wouldn't mind going to my Instagram, X, and Spotify accounts and hitting follow on all of those, I would really appreciate it. But let's get into the news. So, Jimmy Kimmel, the unfunny so-called comedian, host of his ABC late night show, was pulled off the air indefinitely by ABC and by ABC's parent company after comments he made just this week about the assassination of Charlie Kirk and about the Trump administration and Trump allies' response to it. So we're going to play the clip here, and I was kind of shocked, to be honest with you, that this was the clip that got Jimmy Kimmel pulled. Here it is.
We had some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it.
So that was... when I saw that clip, I first saw that clip on Twitter because people were saying that was the clip that got him pulled, and I'm like, this must be wrong, because that was like probably the least offensive joke I've ever heard. And look, he was wrong. He was factually incorrect there when he was saying, he was kind of implying that the shooter of Charlie Kirk was some MAGA guy or some right winger. And by this time that he said that, the facts were clear, and this guy was obviously a left winger by the things that he said on the bullets, by the text messages, by the discords he was a part of, by the people he was associated with, and by the family's statement saying that he had swung more left wing in recent months and years. But so Jimmy Kimmel should have known that what he was saying was stupid and wrong, but that doesn't really warrant him being pulled off the air, if I'm being completely honest. Now, I don't really shed a tear for Jimmy Kimmel specifically. Jimmy Kimmel is an unfunny hack and has been making stupid jokes and making dumb political arguments in the shape of stand-up comedy for years at this point. Whether it's on different topic after different topic, he makes very low-level stupid arguments in the form of so-called comedy. So I don't really shed a tear for Jimmy Kimmel. But my stance on this is kind of mixed. So we have people on the right who jump immediately to this sort of left-wing cancel culture mentality of, yeah, Jimmy Kimmel's done. So goodbye, Jimmy Kimmel, and like all this stuff. And now, it's not that I'm upset about Jimmy Kimmel being fired or put on leave, but we shouldn't immediately jump to someone says something we don't like to we're going to ban them now. And that was kind of the theme I hit on in my last episode talking about Pam Bondi's ridiculous statements about hate speech. And we're using language now like platforming, like hate speech. This is the language that the left used for years when they were, as we're going to get into in a bit, I have a long list here, when they were justifying the federal crackdown on speech in the Biden administration. And they were justifying that through the carefully worded statements about hate speech or misinformation or things like this, whether it's through COVID or any of this stuff, they were justifying deplatforming people on social media, stripping people of their money in their bank account. And we don't want to fall victim to doing the exact same thing. Now, if it comes out that Jimmy Kimmel was put on leave as a result of ABC alone making a financial decision that he was not getting the viewers, or that this was bad for their brand, or the backlash was just to the point where ABC thinks it's a smart business move to pull him, if that becomes the case, then I have no problem with that. That's ABC making their decision. We can agree or disagree with the decision, but I don't really, on principle, I don't have a problem with them doing that. They're an independent company. But if it comes out that the FCC and the federal government or the Trump administration were pressuring ABC directly to get rid of Jimmy Kimmel, then I do have a problem with that, because that's a whole different animal. That is the federal government dictating speech, and we didn't like that when it was done to us. So why are we now doing it? If we made our brand during the Biden administration, and even before that, on free speech absolutism, saying that we shouldn't be banning people for differences of opinion or for statements. We shouldn't be canceling people like Roseanne, like Gina Carano, like these people that were shunned from society for statements that they made. We shouldn't be doing that, because that's unfair, it's uncharitable, and it doesn't align with free speech and the freedom to express your ideas. And in terms of people like Roseanne or Jimmy Kimmel, make jokes that do push the boundary. And you can agree or disagree with that, but these people have the right to say what they want. And if the federal government is involved in the silencing or the suppressing of these voices, I do have a problem with that. I will say that right now. Now, my main point today is that if you open Twitter right now, you'll see prominent figures on the left, you'll see celebrities that are virtue signaling, and you'll see former presidents like Barack Obama, former presidential candidates like Kamala Harris, making statements and saying that this is a step towards an authoritarian state, a step towards a fascist state, seemingly forgetting that they themselves were involved in the beginning of this. I have a list here that I've compiled of some of the authoritarian power grabs. This stuff is from the Biden administration during their years. And it's hilarious to watch these people now virtue signal about being free speech absolutists and valuing the Constitution, when this is just some of the stuff that they engaged in during 2021, 2022, the early part of the Biden administration, when it comes to silencing political enemies, silencing science that doesn't align with their narrative, and silencing alternative points of view. So here, why don't we run down this list of examples of pre-Trump authoritarian state power grabs. First of all, I don't know how many of you guys remember, but right after January 6th, the Biden administration used that as a pretext to strip the individual rights of tons of Americans without charging them with a crime. Tons of people who were around the Capitol on January 6th, who did not enter the Capitol, did not commit a crime, had their bank accounts seized by the Department of Justice, by the federal government, with no warrant, no justification, and under the pretext that they were being investigated indefinitely by the Department of Justice. They had their bank accounts completely seized. The federal government and banking institutions conspired and did not allow them to open bank accounts. The government and 50 banking institutions collaborated and conspired to make sure that these individuals who had not been charged with a crime were not able to open bank accounts. That's just one example of this. Another example, this was admitted by Mark Zuckerberg. Go watch his appearance on Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn. Mark Zuckerberg admitted that the Biden administration pressured Facebook, pressured Twitter, pressured Instagram. They called them up and threatened them. And we saw this. They were pulled into the Senate and pulled into these committee hearings and basically scolded by the lawmakers, threatening them that there will be more regulations if they don't crack down on misinformation, whether it comes to COVID or the election. Mark Zuckerberg said that the Biden administration specifically threatened them with more regulations if they didn't crack down on what they called misinformation. And we all know what that means. Misinformation is one of these other broad terms that's just used by whoever's in power at that moment to crack down on speech that questions their authority. Mark Zuckerberg admitted that was the case. Another example, the Biden administration during the rollout of the COVID vaccine, they were threatening to force every medium and large-sized business in the United States to force their employees to get the COVID vaccine. A blatant overstep. They were going to use OSHA to do it. They were going to use OSHA to mandate that all these businesses, medium and large, in the United States had to force all their employees to get the COVID vaccine with no scientific backing. We all know now, with hindsight, that Anthony Fauci was lying about the science, and the Biden administration was lying about the science, and the health establishment was lying about things the entire time. They were going to use that pseudoscience to force everyone in the country, essentially, to get the vaccine. And thank God the Supreme Court struck it down. But the Biden administration attempted to do what would have been one of the greatest executive overreaches in history. That's another one. Another one was that they also threatened YouTube. And YouTube went on a demonetization and deplatforming spree of anyone that questioned the vaccine or questioned the election. People who ended up being correct in their science that they were presenting were banned on YouTube and demonetized on YouTube, couldn't make a living on YouTube because they were saying things outside of the bounds of the regime's narrative. That's another one. Another one. The TSA put people on federal no-fly lists who were at or around the Capitol on January 6th, again, who were not charged with a crime. That they put them on no-fly lists, and then they were under no obligation to tell those people that they were on no-fly lists. That was classified information, according to them. So there were tons of people put on no-fly lists, and they weren't allowed to know or confirm that they were on no-fly lists, essentially restricting their freedom of movement. That's what the federal government does to the people that go against their opinions under the Biden administration. Another one, which is probably the worst of all, was the Biden DOJ had leaked messages and leaked emails that revealed that they were operating under a policy of treating parents at school board meetings that protested COVID or protested DEI policies or protested critical race theory in their children's schools. They were operating under a policy of treating these parents as domestic terrorists. I kid you not. Parents that were questioning the public schools' theories about teaching their kids, parents who felt their kids were being indoctrinated with a toxic ideology, were being treated like domestic terrorists. They don't think you have control over your kid's education. They think the state can control what your kid learns, even if what the kid learns is not true, even if it's toxic, even if it's a victim mentality. They don't think the parent is in any place to question that, and they think if the parent does question that, then they're a domestic terrorist. That's what the Biden DOJ thought of people that questioned them. And probably the worst of all was, we all, of course, remember Joe Biden's famous, or I should say infamous, Philadelphia speech where he was flanked by 2 Marines and had a blood red background. I'll throw up a picture right here. And in that speech, he branded half the country and anyone that disagreed with him as MAGA Republicans and called them a threat to the Republic, threat to the foundations of our democracy. He said MAGA Republicans were a threat to the Republic and a threat to democracy. This was the unifier Joe Biden. And this is the guy that they're now saying was less authoritarian than Donald Trump. Meanwhile, we ignore all that because it doesn't affect these highfalutin liberals. These liberals like Jimmy Kimmel, who make millions of dollars because they go on TV every night and basically insult middle America. That's who gets protected by these people like Obama. That's who Obama will stick up for when it comes to free speech, because then it starts to creep into an area that questions his power and his authority. But when it comes to middle America, when it comes to people when it comes to parents going to school board meetings and advocating for their children, Obama had nothing to say about them being classified as domestic terrorists. So I don't want to hear Barack Obama, if he wants to be this is what's so sickening about Barack Obama being morally superior in this way. Barack Obama, regardless of free speech, Barack Obama is a sickening individual because he's the butcherer of Libya and Syria and Yemen. Regardless, Obama can never claim to have the moral high ground on anything when he is responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in the Middle East, innocent people. So I don't want to hear Barack Obama claim to be a good person ever again. That's ridiculous. That's just flat on it. That's on its face a preposterous notion. And especially in terms of foreign policy, and now if we go back into free speech, Barack Obama had nothing to say about any of this stuff that I just talked about. About TSA putting people on no-fly lists and then not being obligated to tell them. On the federal government and the DOJ seizing millions of dollars from people from their bank accounts. On parents at school board meetings being classified as domestic terrorists. So people on the left who are so outraged at Jimmy Kimmel being pulled off the air, their beloved Jimmy Kimmel, who preaches the party line talking points every night on ABC. I might agree with you in this instance that Jimmy Kimmel, depending on the circumstances, if the FCC pulled him off the air, I might agree with you that he shouldn't have been pulled off the air. But let's not ignore the fact that when it came to people in middle America that were being victimized by the Biden administration because of their speech, you had nothing to say. So I don't want to hear you guys act on morally superior or get on some high horse when you had nothing to say when it affected actual average people, not the millionaire in Beverly Hills. Okay? So my stance on all this in a nutshell, if the marketplace of ideas is filtering people out like Jimmy Kimmel, if the idea of freedom of association means that people don't want to associate, companies like ABC don't want to associate with Jimmy Kimmel and the things he says, then I have no problem with that. But if it's the federal government cracking down on Jimmy Kimmel, like the Biden administration cracked down on parents at school boards and people who were around the Capitol on January 6th, then I do have a problem with that. Because if we're going to be consistent here, if we're going to be principled, then we should not be advocating for stuff like that. So with all this being said, my point here is that I don't want the federal government pressuring ABC to take their hosts off the air, just like I don't want the Biden administration classifying parents who advocate for their children as domestic terrorists. So I think we're pretty consistent here on the Quest for Clarity podcast. So unlike the liberals, unlike the leftists that say one thing and then complain about another, we will be honest here and be consistent with our free speech principles and say that if the federal government pulled Jimmy Kimmel off the air, I'm not for that. All right, you happy there? All right. That's where I think I'll end off the show today. And thank you guys so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. We're almost at 100 subscribers. I would like to reach that goal. So if you guys would please hit subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. Also, if you could go follow me on Instagram, X, and Spotify, I'd really appreciate that as well. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Have a good day.
Americanism, not globalism.
I am not a slave. I am a free citizen.
There should be no Federal Reserve system.
Only America first.